Greetings, and welcome to the All Facts Matter podcast, where we push back against corporate media propaganda with facts, evidence, and data. I'm Peter, the author of All Facts Matter. Let's begin. If we are lucky, the October employment situation summary that has just been released yesterday by the Bureau of Labor Statistics will prove to be, to use a recently popularized term, garbage. If we are lucky, we will see massive revisions in November and December. And those of a certain age may hear Gilda Radner's voice in the back of their mind going, "Never mind." Bonus points if you get the reference. That's if we're lucky. If we're not lucky, then the October employment situation summary is telling us that the jobs recession in this country has gotten considerably worse. What has me saying these apocalyptic kind of things is when the BLS released the employment situation summary yesterday, it announced that in the month of October, a whopping 12,000 jobs were created all month in the entire country. 12,000. In September, we had around 250,000 jobs created, according to the BLS. And in August, we had around, had been reported initially around 143,000 jobs. Been revised. Both of those numbers have been revised since then, but 143,000, 250,000. These are the levels of job growth that a typical month is what we see. We don't see 12,000, which is a tenth of what is normal, and is about a tenth of what was projected. Wall Street analysts were expecting anywhere from between 100,000 to 120,000 jobs. They overestimated by about 90%, which is a pretty big miss. That's not the kind of miss that normally happens. Now, we do have to consider the possibility that the report is just simply wrong. Not only is the number itself just so incredibly unusually bad, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a penchant for having to go back and correct things. In September, they initially reported about 250,000 jobs created. They had to knock that total down by about 31,000 jobs. In August, they initially reported around 143,000 jobs created. They bumped that up by about 17,000 to right at 160,000. And then they dropped it back down again by 81,000 to where they were right at 78,000 jobs were created in August. Between these 2 months, there was a net correction of 112,000 jobs. That's a lot of jobs, particularly when the jobs that are created in October is only 12,000. The correction for August and September is itself about 10 times what was the number of jobs that were created in October. And this part is actually normal for the BLS. If we look at just this year, we see that month after month after month after month after month, they're having to revise their job totals and usually they're revising them downward. So far this year, they've had to revise them down by about 405,000 jobs. Now, mind you, that's not that's not counting the 818,000 jobs that are being uh, that's a revision that's going against the 2023 job totals. And this is also not discounting not counting the month by month corrections from 2023, which are also not part of that 818,000. So that over the last 2 years, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has managed to overstate job growth somewhere between 1.5 million and 1 million jobs. So if it can overstate that in the space of 2 years, can it swing and a miss on a jobs report? Yeah, it can. So this may turn out to be, we may see a revision next month that brings us back up to, the 100,000 jobs range. And in January, there was a downward revision of 124,000 jobs. So, these kind of figures are not out of the realm of possibility. We could see a revision that massive. That does happen. That can happen. Yeah. But until then, until we get any revisions, these are the numbers that we have to go with. And the first thing we have to understand is that while the report itself is saying that there was, among total non-farm employment, there was 12,000 jobs created. Total non-farm employment includes government jobs. And when we look at just the private sector, it was net job loss of 28,000. If it had not been for the government, we'd be looking at an entire report. The headline number on the report would be negative. With about 40,000 jobs, government jobs created, that saved the entire overall jobs report from being negative. But the private sector still lost 28,000 jobs. Now, job loss is never a good thing, particularly if yours is the job that gets lost. But for the entire economy to lose, 28,000 jobs means that across all sectors, there wasn't enough growth in one sector to balance out a lack of growth in another sector, such that the net of different employment sectors, having rising employment and falling employment. This month, the sectors with falling employment dominated. And we see that when we look at a breakdown by sector. Of course, goods producing jobs went from about 30,000 down to a job loss of about 37,000 jobs. This is for good producing sectors. That was then pulled up a little bit to 28,000, to the 28,000 jobs, because 9,000 service sector jobs were added. But even at that, in September, there was over 160,000 service sector jobs created. We went from 160,000 service sector jobs to 9,000 service sector jobs in a single month. That's a very steep drop-off. That's a steeper drop-off than what we've even seen in goods-producing jobs, where we went from about plus 20, plus 30 to minus 37. We're looking at roughly a swing of about somewhere between 50 and 70,000 jobs. We're looking at a swing of about 150,000 jobs on the service sector. It's 150,000 jobs that the level of growth just didn't happen. The growth just simply stopped. And that's pretty remarkable. That doesn't usually happen. Yeah. Now, part of it we can identify, because when we drill into manufacturing in particular, we see we have this huge spike in job loss in transportation equipment manufacturing. Now, this surge, or anti-surge, really, this precipitous drop in transportation equipment manufacturing employment, this is the Boeing strike right here. This is about 46,000 Boeing workers now on the picket line. And so this, of course, is by far the most dominating aspect of you know, the amount of job loss we see in the manufacturing sectors. But if we look at the other job sectors, we've got only about 3 or 4 areas where there's any type of job growth at all. Yes, Boeing is the worst one this month, and Boeing was the worst one last month, although not by nearly as much. But there's also, primary metal manufacturing, fabricated metal manufacturing. I mean, there's only about 3 or 4 sectors of manufacturing where the change in overall jobs was positive. It was positive. That in virtually every sector of manufacturing in October, there was job loss, and not just at Boeing. This was job loss that was happening across the board. We see the same thing happening in September. There was job loss across the board. This is not just Boeing. Now, if we take the transportation sector out and look at the remainder of them through the entirety of the year, we have to take the transportation out, because that 46,000 drop is so large it makes the other ones hard to see clearly. But we see just in these other sectors, we see that this is for all manufacturing areas. But job loss has been a feature of every manufacturing sector since at least the beginning of the year. Yeah. So whatever forces are prompting things like the drop in manufacturing transportation equipment, yes, that's attributable to the Boeing strike, but that doesn't explain all of these. That doesn't explain all of these months. There's a lot more going on here than just one bad report. October may be calling attention to it, but these issues did not start with Boeing. And we can see that if we index these sectors to the beginning of 2021, which is the start of the Biden-Harris administration. And I do a lot of indexing when I'm analyzing these things, because when you look at things in an index fashion, it's a handy way to bring quantities that are on different magnitudes, different sizes, different different absolute levels, and allows us to look at the relative shifts side by side. And that allows us, one of the advantages of that is you can then start to see where you start to get complementary trends or correlating trends. And in this case, one of the things we start to notice is that between early 2022 and late 2023, virtually every sector of manufacturing employment went into decline. Yeah, furniture was the first one. It started declining in January of 2022 or thereabouts. And machinery manufacturing is probably one of the last ones to slip into decline. Other than, of course, transportation equipment, which has also in this past summer went into decline, but every single sector is declining and has been declining for multiple months. In some cases, for a couple of years. So these are issues that go beyond a single report. This is not these are not things that can be explained by a single report. Yeah, and the other when we're looking at this, we see that as bad as the jobs created number was, what's curious about it is we don't see an extraordinarily large influx to unemployment. Unemployment rose by about 150,000 last month, which is seems large, but it's not the largest that we've seen this year. Um, and it's not even the second largest. It's where we see an increase. It's like, okay, it's about a middle of the road kind of increase. It's a normal rise in unemployment, if you will, and that normal rise in unemployment, coupled with just the expansion of the overall labor force, is why the uh, unemployment rate stayed at about 4.1%. Yeah. Where we do see some cause for concern is in October, we saw another large jump in the number of workers not in the labor force. Yeah, 428,000 workers basically exited the labor force altogether in October. That means that they don't have a job and they're also not showing up in the ranks of the unemployed. Yeah. This is actually, where did the workers that disappeared from uh, uh, private sectors to produce negative payroll growth? Uh, Here's probably where a big chunk of them wound up, was not in the labor force. They're not looking for they're either not looking for a job, or they're having trouble finding one. But they're basically out of, for whatever reason. We have 428,000 more people out of the labor force than we did in September. And anytime you have this many workers leaving the labor force, this is not a good sign. You know, a vibrant economy, a productive economy, is going to be adding workers, going to be bringing people into the labor force, bringing people into the ranks of the employed. When they're going into the labor force, when they're exiting the labor force like this, they're not even on the unemployed. They're not looking for work at this point, or they're not able to look for work, or one of the criteria like that. But they're not they're not they're not counted as being part of the labor force. If you're going to have a vibrant economy, you want workers coming into your labor force. You want to see your labor force expanding. You don't want to see the demographic of those not in the labor force expanding. Yeah, and to to drive this point home, not only are we seeing, did we see private sector employment drop by a total of about 28,000 in October. The number of full-time workers also declined by around 164,000 workers. So some people lost their job, but others have moved from, have apparently moved from full-time to maybe part-time work. That's so they haven't lost their jobs completely, but they're considerably less employed than they were a month ago. You had 160,000 people lost their full-time job. Maybe they're not working the same job but only working part-time. Maybe they went to another part-time job. We can't really tell that from the data, but there was a tremendous loss. There's been a significant loss of full-time employment. And when we look across the entirety of the 2 years, we see that this is something that's been happening again and again and again, that there's loss of full-time employment. Yeah. And if we look at the level of full-time employment in this country, we see that while there was good growth in 2021 and a bit of a plateau in 2022, but there was some more growth in 2023. You know, uh, since since about middle of 2023, somewhere between June maybe November 2023, uh, full-time employment has been on the decline, and this is actually pretty significant because, contrary to what the Biden-Harris administration likes to say about how many millions of jobs they've created, most of the employment growth that happened during 2021 wasn't growth, wasn't really jobs being added so much as it was getting back to where this country was at before the COVID pandemic panic recession, before the government basically threw everybody out of work. You know, we're just and through most of 2021, the job growth that we were seeing was just getting back to that level. Yeah, and so when we look at where full-time employment was when Donald Trump first took office in 2017, and where it was at in February of 2020, this is the amount of jobs that Trump added. The from if we take from that point, which was and during the Biden-Harris administration, right around January of 2022 was when full-time employment got back to this 130 million level. From there to right about 134 million. That's the amount of growth that is attributable to the Biden-Harris administration. About 3.9 million full-time jobs. About 1.2 million of that, so roughly a third, has now disappeared. So of the jobs that can be plausibly attributed to the Biden-Harris administration, and yes, there are, depending on which stat you look at, between about 3 and 4 million of them, about 1.2 million of them, about a third of them, have since disappeared. And that's within, we're still in the Biden-Harris administration. So within the same presidential administration as those 3.9 million full-time jobs were added, 1.2 million of them were taken away again. And this is another reason why people think that the economy was better under Trump. That type of decline of full-time work just didn't happen under Trump, not until you get to 2020 and the pandemic panic, which completely scrambles everything. Yes, during the Trump era, we saw massive job loss. We can debate how much he's responsible for some of the lockdowns, but 2020 itself, because of the COVID pandemic panic, was such a chaotic year that to try to say, well, to try to say that we have to that Trump took us down to this low level of full-time employment. The pandemic panic just completely roils everything. So we typically stop the counting at right before that, and that from that point, getting back to that point is the recovery phase, which we reached in 2022, and then the Biden-Harris administration was able to add a couple million more jobs on top of that, but now they've given back a third. And again, that didn't happen under Trump. Where are these full-time workers going? Obviously, a number of them probably went into just went straight out of the labor force. And a big chunk of that may actually be because of Hurricane Helene, because of some of the devastation that's happening in Georgia and North Carolina. But we do know that there's not been enough growth in part-time employment to even talk about taking up some of the slack from the loss of full-time employment. But that being said, we are seeing an increase in part-time employment as well, which means, and when we look at specifically at the people who are working part-time because that's the only kind of work that they can find, or that's what the state of the economy, local economy, or business work constraints or whatever. Uh, they'd like to be working full time, but they're just not able to for whatever reason. Uh, Both of these situations are on the rise. And if we index them to January of 2023, we see that sometime in between late 2022 and January 2023 is when part-time employment started going up in this country. Now, just as we want to see workers coming into the economy, as a general rule, we would prefer them to be full-time employees. From an economic perspective, we're seeing much more productivity, we're seeing much more output, we're seeing much more growth if people are working full-time. Obviously, not everyone's going to be working full-time for a variety of reasons, but those who are able to work full-time, if we can get them working full-time, that's going to yield the greatest amount of economic growth. That's going to yield the greatest amount of economic prosperity for everyone. Full-time employment is an absolute good thing in this situation. Yeah, but what we're not seeing, and kind of to add insult to injury to all of this, is we also saw a steep drop in multiple job holders. More than 300,000, 354,000 workers are no longer holding multiple jobs in the month. For some reason, that correction happened in the month of October. So, whether people were working two part-time jobs or a part-time job and a full-time job, all this to try to make ends meet or whatever, those situations stopped. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they became completely unemployed. They may have gone to, strictly speaking, if they're no longer multiple job holders, they've gone down to just having a single job, not necessarily zero jobs, which would be unemployed. But even at that, you've got where you were potentially getting, in terms of number of jobs added to into the economy, you might be getting some double counting because of multiple job holders. Those multiple jobs disappeared. But again, that comes into the concept of job loss. This, when coupled with private sector job loss, this is also cause for concern because this is, again, fewer people working. But even when they are working, they're not working as much. We've been seeing in this country since before the start of the Biden-Harris administration, but throughout the Biden-Harris administration, the average work week for an average employee has been declining. It's about an average of about half an hour less. That's for an average across an entire entirety of private sector employment. A 30-minute drop, half an hour drop in hours worked per week is a pretty steep drop. That's not the level of decline one would normally see, and it means that in some cases, in some businesses, in some industries, the work week has actually gone down quite a bit less. Has been quite a bit less than roughly 34, 35 hours per week. A few cases have been more, but in many cases they're actually working substantially less, which also kind of, again, you want people working more. Your economy is always going to be doing better the more that people are working. Yeah, and when we break this down into goods producing and service sector employment, the goods producing jobs typically are the longer are the longer hours per week. You have more hours. You're more likely to be around a 40-hour work week, maybe more with overtime. In a goods producing job, than you are in a service sector job. Uh, but whether we're looking at the total goods producing or just the service sector, these are all, if we look closely, we see these are all declining average weekly hours. And if we index them, we can see this more. We can see this more dramatically. This is one of the virtues of indexing is it kind of makes some of these vertical trends more visible. But you know, goods producing employment dropped. The number of hours worked per week dropped by about 1%, and the service sector, the number of hours per week dropped by about 2%, and the average, and it netted out to, uh, right around about 1.7, about 1.7% decline in the number of hours worked per week. Uh, and while there's been a steep drop off in the number of hours worked, that's not getting compensated for really by an increase in average hourly earnings. Yes, our average hourly earnings have been going up, but they've been staying in the same general band between roughly about a nickel and about 22 cents per hour increase each month. It's a the level of increase is pretty much, it's not a constant, but it's very very close to it. Um, and what this is doing is this is not adding. This is not leaving. This is not leaving enough wage growth to keep pace with inflation. Inflation took off, as we all know, in 2021 and 2022. Wages have basically increased at the same rate, uh, which again is rather remarkable because with the number of job openings that have been reported, like on the JOLTS reports and everything, it's rather surprising that there was not an upward pressure, not a greater upward pressure on uh, on uh, the different jobs that might be available, because uh, when you have unfilled job openings, it kind of suggests that there's increased demand for labor. Um, that should have pushed labor prices up, and which is to say wages. So, but we didn't see that, and that's why that is to be topic for another podcast. But uh, what's important here is wages have never made there's not never been a shift in growth to where it was clearly an attempt to get caught up on the level of on the average level of pay, to where it's getting back up above the inflation rate. This is the difference between the CPI line and the average hourly earnings line, is the degree to which inflation has taken a bite out of the paycheck, and the paycheck has not recovered yet. This is perhaps the most important aspect of understanding the impact of inflation, is that once the prices go up, they tend to stay up, and the only way to really equalize that is to bring wages up by the same amount, or to the same relative position. And again, looking at across all sectors, we see the same thing. There is no place in the American economy where wages have kept pace with inflation since 2021. Across the entirety of the economy, paychecks in real terms have declined. And how much have they declined? Again, it's the difference between the indexed CPI graph and the various index, the index of the various sectors for payrolls. That there's been a pretty significant reduction in effective in take home pay, in real pay, because of inflation, and that has not been, and we've not seen that get get corrected yet. Now, with all of that bad, with all of that bad news in the jobs report, uh, the question is, what happened? This is such a deviation from the norm. Is like, what went wrong? Now, the BLS is saying, well, they've collected all the data the way that they normally did. They've done everything the same. But Hurricane Helene scrambled things up a little bit. So that's our best explanation. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. Problem with that is it doesn't explain, as I pointed out before. And you look at it again. The downward trend started before October. The downward trend started before Hurricane Helene even formed, before Hurricane Milton even formed, much less made landfall. These declines that we're seeing in manufacturing sector after manufacturing sector, when they occur before September of this year, no, these are not things that are attributable to Hurricane Helene. None of this decline that happened in manufacturing during this past summer, is attributable to Hurricane Helene. And most of the decline in manufacturing, with the exception of the Boeing strike, is from before Hurricane Helene. Before Hurricane Helene could even scramble the reporting. So, yes, Hurricane Helene probably did have an effect. That's quite believable, but that effect can't explain what has happened in prior months. Yeah, and at the same time, yes, we would anticipate that places that have been hit hard by a hurricane, unemployment's going to surge. But the biggest surge in continuing claims for unemployment in recent weeks came in the last week of September. We've not seen a surge of equal magnitude in October. And in fact, it did climb up, but it then almost dropped all the way back down to where it was at the beginning of the month. So we're not seeing the kind of ongoing unemployment that we would expect to see from a hurricane. Now, it could simply be that because of the amount of devastation in places like Georgia and North Carolina, that some of those numbers just haven't been recorded yet, and so we may see some significant increases in unemployment down the road. That's actually quite possible, and one might almost say probable. But it doesn't explain that. But that alone is not going to explain just how horrifically bad this jobs report is, and how it's the culmination of several trends that predate this latest report. And the other problem with writing all of this off as being Hurricane Helene is if we look at the ADP payroll report, which came out last Wednesday, and we look at the employment report from ADP for the southeastern part of the United States, the area that would have been affected by Hurricane Helene gave up 13,000 jobs. Now, this is according to ADP, which the ADP numbers don't always jibe with the official stats from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but they're usually pretty close, and it's a report that comes out every month. So, based on what ADP is reporting, Hurricane Helene has basically diminished employment by about 13,000 jobs. Now, again, this could end up being more because the unemployment levels go up quite a bit as infrastructures get put back in place in places like Georgia and North Carolina. And that may happen in November, December. And we should expect that perhaps to happen in November, December. But until it happens, this is the data that we have to work with. And what it's saying is uh, we've got some really, really, really big problems. Yeah. Now, corporate media is trying to go along with the BLS line of yes, it's Hurricane Helene, it's Hurricane Milton, it's Boeing. Um, the numbers don't add up. Boeing was influential in manufacturing job loss in October, but manufacturing has been losing jobs all year long, going back into last year, and that's not Boeing. Uh, yeah, we've been seeing declining full-time employment since before the start of the year, and that's not Hurricane Helene, that's not Hurricane Milton. Uh, so yes, the hurricanes almost certainly had an impact on unemployment. It would be quite remarkable for them not to. A major labor strike when 33, 46,000 workers are on the picket lines. Yeah, that's going to be a tremendous impact on employment. That's a significant chunk of the workforce not working at that point. So there's no doubt that Boeing had an impact. There's no doubt that Hurricane Helene had an impact. There's no doubt that Hurricane Milton had an impact. But when you look at the detail of this jobs report, as with prior jobs reports, the trends are still there. And what what the top level number being this bad calls into fact. Yes, these trends have been going on, and one hopes that the apocalyptically bad top line number will force the experts on Wall Street and the experts in Washington and the experts in the White House to take a look at this jobs report and realize, okay, we do have a problem. We do have a jobs recession going on in this country, and we do need to be concerned about that. It would be nice if that were the outcome of this jobs report. Yeah, this is a bad report. There's no two ways about it. The data in this report is beyond ugly. This is one of those times when the word fugly is definitely definitely an apt description. But it's the worst of a worsening series of job reports. It's a continuation of several negative trends, and that's what's the most alarming thing about it, is that if this data is accurate and there are not significant revisions to the upside in November and December, then what that's saying is that these trends have just gotten considerably worse, and the jobs recession, which has been ongoing since last fall at the very latest, is getting considerably worse. Will Wall Street notice? Will Washington D.C. notice? Will corporate media finally realize that no, the jobs market is not healthy in this country? If they're really looking at the report honestly and scrutinizing and interrogating the data, yes, that is exactly what the conclusion that they should reach. That is exactly the conclusion that they should come up with. That the job market in this country is toxic. It's not been tight. It's been toxic, and it's getting more toxic. It's getting worse. That's what they should realize. I'm not going to hold my breath. They've been very good about not noticing thus far. My guess is they're going to continue to not notice. And that's probably the most disturbing thing about this. That the people who need to be noticing aren't noticing and are likely to continue to not notice. And while this has not exactly been an upbeat presentation, I hope it's been enlightening and informative. I know it's been a fairly long one, but there was just a lot of data to unpack here. But I do hope you found this informative and useful. If you like this presentation, please do like it and share it out to your friends. Spread the word, so to speak. Please also consider making either a one-time donation to or becoming a paid subscriber to All Facts Matter. Your support is what keeps this work going. I appreciate everybody's support, especially those my free subscribers. Your comments and continued support and encouragement is what keeps me going, doing this and putting this kind of content out there. Um, so hopefully you found this informative and useful. And thank you for listening, and thank you for watching, and have a nice day.